But the reality is that the wording in the statutes of the International Criminal Court are so elastic. What that means is that nations that agreed and ratified, agreed in principle that they would prosecute, quote, crimes against humanity. The assumption being that we all understood that to be the crimes of people like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. However, the crimes that are actually listed after the fact are defined in greater depth, and it includes such things as the human rights to, and then it gives a laundry list, and one of them, basic health care services. If we at the United Nations, we constantly fight the Catholic Church and conservative delegations from various countries constantly fight to keep the phrase health and reproductive rights out of platforms so that it cannot become an international right, because that's code speak for abortion and contraception.
And of course, this was one of the things that became so apparent at that Cairo conference,
exactly,
was that there's been a redefinition of the words. So we hear human rights and we say, yes, but human rights, that's a very Catholic thought. You know, there's nothing the matter with this. But human rights means something so totally other than what we would assume that it would mean. You're giving us a prime example there. What would be some of the other examples that we would have?
Another example is that entire populations cannot be discriminated against, and that would include, quote, gender rights, and of course we have the issue of homosexuality. Well, this is all in theory. What does it mean on the ground? And I think perhaps a little illustration would be very instructive. The Dutch group that in the year 2000 met in Rome were so very, very in your face to the Catholic population. They engaged in Catholic bashing and activities that were not suitable for the family, shall we say. And when the Holy Father said that this was an affront to decent people, then certain members of that particular homosexual group went back to Holland and filed a suit with the Dutch court against the Holy Father for infringing on and perhaps even a hate crime against homosexuals because he refused to acknowledge their right to, quote, gender justice. Now, at the time, the Dutch court rejected their claim, saying we don't have jurisdiction in Rome. But now, that was before the International Criminal Court was operative. Now it's operative. The theory being that any pope, or perhaps a bishop in a nation, who would take the pulpit, or on our television program perhaps, say out loud that homosexuality is an objectively disordered affliction that one must struggle against, or that condoms can't be used, that bishop, that pope, could be charged with a hate crime against a specific group of people, homosexuals, or in the case of AIDS, perhaps the people of Africa. If the Holy Father had permitted condoms, then the argument would go, then that was a loving thing. If he says condoms are against Catholic moral teaching, then is he consigning an entire continent to AIDS? Of course he's not, because the Holy Father is only given an instruction. He can't force people to use or to not use. That's a personal choice. But Planned Parenthood did in fact write a letter to the Holy Father saying, and using war crimes language that in effect set up, when the International Criminal Court is operative, we might consider bringing a class action suit at the International Criminal Court level against the Vatican for having refused to give condoms to people in AIDS and to obstruct the rights to abortion and cause a whole class of people, women, to be disenfranchised on a massive scale, millions of women, of their rights. So this becomes a crime against humanity at an international level, you see, because of media, because of satellite communications, because you speak to more than a handful of people. It becomes international.
Well, you see, as you share that, that is so antithetical to the American understanding of free speech. And what you're suggesting to us is that when we give up sovereignty, when we sign on to this one world government, this whole notion of a new world order, We are, in fact, giving up rights that belong to every human person, true human rights that belong to every human person. And of course, if that can happen to the Holy Father, if that can happen to a bishop, it can happen to you and me discussing this very topic on this very program. It can happen to one of our viewers as she or he protests and prays in front of an abortion clinic. It can happen to pro-life groups. It can happen to respect life groups. It can happen to anyone who would hold to the teachings of the Catholic Church, because the teachings of the Catholic Church have become the enemy of this New World Order. Is that too strong?
No, that's precisely on target. And to illustrate again how easy it is to slide into this danger zone, who would have dreamed 15 years ago that a Joe Scheidler would have RICO laws, racketeering laws, applied against him? You speak of free speech. What happened to Joe Scheidler's free speech? So those who are saying, I'm concerned that this is overstating or dramatizing the case because, you know, the International Criminal Court would not be used for this, that's not its intent. Well, when RICO laws were enacted, was the intent to put a cork in the mouth of pro-lifers who were exercising their due right to free speech?
Now, you bring up something here that I think we have to touch on. You use the word overstating. Years ago, and not in the too recent past, and even today, some would say, well, you know, that's that conspiracy theory stuff. I mean, you know, China and Mary Jo, you're going off the deep end here. This is, you know, you're tied up in this conspiracy theory notion. Is that, in fact, what we're doing today?
No. Of course, again, recent history aids our cause today, because we've heard people such as George Bush Sr. speak of the New World Order. Walter Cronkite, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, has spoken about the New World Order. So for us to use it doesn't make us conspiracy theorists any more than it did those two. So I think we should feel comfortable with that. But what is the idea behind conspiracy theory? Of course, we have the typical jab, which is, oh, you're looking for the black helicopters over on the other side of the horizon here. No. What that means is we're not expecting black helicopters. What we're looking at is before Hitler took over Germany and was able to impose Nazism on a basically decent country, there were years leading up to set in place the legal controls and the mechanisms to achieve legally the aims of the Nazi Party and to impose that worldview on an entire nation and perhaps Europe. So no, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think what we have to do is, it's not about black helicopters, it's not about 12 men in a back room. While there are conspiracy theorists out there who point to certain groups, typical that you will read about in conspiracy theory are, you know, the Masonic worldview and the Rosicrucians, the Illuminati and all that. And there is some element of truth to that, but leaving that aside, the real truth is that since the Enlightenment, since what we might call sort of the German school of philosophy that began with Hegel and Feuerbach and Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, that God is dead and rationalism, science, is the new God, that we do not have to worry anymore about heaven and hell. It's this earth that matters, and therefore, if there's no God to answer to, what we do on this earth, we can program man. He's perfectible. He doesn't have original sin. He's perfectible. If we just come up with the right social theory, the right psychological theory, the right form of government, then we can rebuild a paradise in our image. And so what has happened is, with the natural progression of this philosophy that's in error, because, of course, there is original sin, there will be no paradise, no utopia this side of Heaven's Gate. What has happened is that man, sort of in his arrogance and rejecting God, again, the whole Nietzsche philosophy, making science a God, the progression of this philosophy is not conspiracy theory per se, but has led down the road to the idea that we can create a utopia, and if a certain elite group or a certain wise men of the world group gets together to talk about how we can shape this utopia. Is it a conspiracy, or is it the natural progression of 300 years of philosophical error?